Montana Territory. August 1877. The pain hit her so hard she dropped to her knees in the dust, her fingers clutching the dry grass beside the trail. Thunderheads rolled in the distance, and the sun was setting low, turning the sky to fire. Veronica Belleford's breath came in ragged gasps as another contraction ripped through her. She was alone. Again. The wagon her husband left behind 2 weeks ago now sat broken an hour back, its wheels shattered from a rock-strewn descent. He had gone to find help and never came back. She had waited 3 days, rationed every drop of water, but her belly had dropped and the child was coming whether he returned or not. And now, on her knees in the grass, boots scuffed and dress torn at the hem, she knew she would not make it much farther. Lightning forked in the distance. The baby kicked hard as if sensing the storm, and then another pain bent her in half. "Help," she whispered, her voice lost to the wind. A shadow passed across her vision. "Ma'am?" She blinked up through sweat and pain at the man on horseback. A cowboy, maybe in his late 20s, tanned from the sun, dark blonde hair tousled beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted fast, boots hitting the earth, reins dropped without worry. "I need," she gasped, gripping her side. "The baby's coming now." The man crouched beside her without hesitation, pressing a steadying hand to her back. "My name's Silas Zayne," he said quickly, eyes scanning her face. "You do not have to do this alone." She cried out again, the pain stealing her breath. Silas pulled off his coat and laid it on the grass, gently guiding her down. His voice stayed calm, low, and steady, even as her body trembled. "You're safe. I'm right here. What's your name?" "Veronica," she whispered. "All right, Veronica, just focus on breathing. I've delivered a foal before and helped my neighbor's wife with her third, but I'll need you to guide me." "No time," she gasped. "It is coming now." And it did. In a matter of minutes, after one long scream and a flood of tears she did not remember shedding, the child entered the world beneath the open sky. Silas held the tiny, wriggling form in his hands, his eyes wide with something close to awe. "It's a boy," he said softly. Veronica sobbed out a laugh, her arms reaching. Silas passed the baby to her, his hands gentle, reverent. The boy's cry was strong, defiant against the wind. Veronica cradled him to her chest, tears streaking down her cheeks. Silas crouched beside her, one hand loosely on the baby's back, the other steadying her shoulder. "You did good. You both did." Thunder cracked overhead. Silas looked up. "There's a cabin a few miles east. Belonged to an old trapper I knew, abandoned now. If you can hold on a little longer, I will get you there," he said. She nodded weakly, her whole body shaking. Silas scooped her up, careful not to jostle the tiny bundle in her arms. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse. Veronica clung to the child, who had already fallen asleep against her chest. "His name is Jameson," she murmured. Silas helped her up into the saddle, then mounted behind her, holding them both steady as the horse started east toward shelter. By the time the cabin came into view, the storm had broken. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking Silas through, but he never stopped. Inside the cabin, he lit a fire with trembling hands and wrapped Veronica in every blanket he could find. He boiled water, brought in herbs, even found a few clean cloths. He stayed up through the night, feeding the fire, watching over her and Jameson like they were his own. When she woke in the morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of her newborn breathing softly beside her, Silas was asleep in the rocking chair, boots still damp, hat across his chest. She watched him, heart unsteady. He had not spoken of leaving, had not asked for thanks. He had simply stayed. Later that morning, as she sipped weak coffee and watched Silas gently lift Jameson into his arms to rock him, she asked, "Why did you stop? You could have ridden right past me." Silas looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Saw a woman on her knees in the dust. Could not keep riding after that. Veronica swallowed hard. You did not have to stay. I know, he said softly, eyes falling back to the baby. But I wanted to. Her heart ached in a new way, then something gentler, quieter, but every bit as strong as the pain that brought Jameson into the world. She looked at him, standing there in yesterday's clothes, his jaw shadowed with stubble, one large hand cradling her newborn son like he had known him all his life. In that moment, she knew. He had stepped in as a father in one graceful moment. And something in her heart, something she had thought broken, began to stir. The second morning in the cabin dawned gray and raw, fog hanging low across the hills. The air carried the scent of wet pine and ash from the hearth. Veronica sat on the edge of the cot, legs tucked beneath her, her body still stiff but less fragile than the day before. Jameson lay curled against her side, his tiny mouth working in sleep. Across the room, Silas was slicing strips of salted pork onto a dented skillet. He didn't look over as he worked, but his voice reached her clearly. There's a creek downhill. Cold but clean. I thought I'd wash some linens there later if you're all right for a bit. She shifted, brushing the hair from her temple. I could help. He glanced back then, his eyes moving from her face to the baby and back. You carried him into the world less than 2 days ago. You've done enough. Veronica looked down at her hands. The skin across her knuckles was rough, one nail broken low. I don't like feeling helpless. You're not, he said simply, turning back to the fire. You just need rest. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just full of things unsaid. Outside, a mourning dove called from somewhere near the eaves. Veronica watched the flames dance beneath the pan, the scent of breakfast beginning to rise. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. I was headed for Helena. My brother has a dry goods store there. He wired money for the trip after my husband wrote him. Silas didn't ask questions, but she saw the slight turn of his head, the way his shoulders tensed just enough to mean he was listening. He said he'd meet us outside town, near the station. That was the plan anyway. She looked up. I don't know if he's still waiting or if he even got the letter. Silas scraped the pork onto a tin plate and brought it over, placing it on the stool beside her. We'll get you there once you're strong enough. I passed through Helena last spring. It's grown. Shouldn't be too hard to find your brother if he's still there. Veronica nodded, tucking the blanket more securely around Jameson. I didn't want to go back to them, my family, but I couldn't stay where we were either. Silas didn't ask why. He just pulled the second stool closer and sat, resting his forearms on his knees. Sometimes the road we meant to take burns away behind us. Ain't no shame in changing course. She studied him for a moment, the way he kept his voice low, almost like he didn't want to disturb the quiet. Do you have family? He shook his head once. Not anymore. My sister married into a ranch in Wyoming, but we haven't written in a while. She traced the rim of the plate with one finger. You carry yourself like someone who's used to being alone. Maybe, he said. But I don't mind company that knows how to be quiet. They shared a small smile, one that came and went like sunlight through clouds, brief but warm. Later that afternoon, when the rain let up, Silas left the cabin with a sack slung over his shoulder. Veronica watched from the doorway, Jameson in her arms as he disappeared down the slope toward the creek. She stood there long after he was out of sight, the wind tugging at the hem of her dress. Inside, she laid the baby down and began folding one of the cleaner shirts she'd rinsed the night before. Her hands moved slowly, her body still sore, but something steadier had taken root in her since the birth. She glanced toward the door again. Silas returned just before dusk, his sleeves damp and a fresh scrape on his knuckle. He didn't mention it, just handed her a bundle of washed cloths and set a small sack of wild greens by the hearth. "There's a rabbit snare a few miles west. Might check it tomorrow," he said, unbuckling his belt. "Could use something fresh." She met his gaze. "You're not in a rush to leave." He didn't answer right away. "You need someone here, and I don't have anywhere pressing to be." Her voice dropped. "You've already done more than most would." Silas's gaze steadied on hers. "I didn't stop for most." Neither of them spoke after that. He knelt to tend the fire and she returned to folding cloth. But something between them had shifted, not in words, not in gestures, but in the quiet that settled. Not the silence of strangers, but the hush of people learning one another's shape without needing to speak it aloud. The third day broke clear and cold. Frost clung to the window glass in thin webs, though the season still claimed summer. Veronica wrapped Jameson in one of the flannel-lined feed sacks Silas had cleaned and stitched the night before, tucking him close before stepping outside for the first time since the birth. The cabin sat in a low fold of the land, rimmed by lodgepole pine and cottonwood. Mist lifted slowly off the grass, and the mountains in the distance stretched blue and sharp under the rising sun. Silas was splitting wood near the shed, sleeves rolled, hands steady on the axe. She watched him a moment before he noticed her. "You sure you're up for the cold?" he asked. She nodded, didn't sleep much, thought the air might help. He set the axe against the stump. "There's a bench behind the shed, gets the morning light. I'll bring you something warm." She followed the path he pointed out, boots soft on the wet earth. The bench was old, the grain silvered, but it held steady. She lowered herself carefully, Jameson still resting against her chest. The sun hit her face, and she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of damp wood and pine bark. Silas came a few minutes later with a tin mug of steeped bark tea, his steps quiet. He handed it to her without comment, then leaned against the shed wall, arms folded. "I went back to where I found you yesterday," he said. "Wagon's still there, nothing touched. I gathered what I could." There were a few wrapped parcels, cloth, dried beans, some paper. "Figured you'd want 'em." Veronica's eyes opened. "Thank you. I didn't think it was worth going back." There was a wooden box under the seat with some keepsakes. "I didn't open it." She looked down at Jameson. "That belonged to my mother. I brought it west when I married." He didn't press her for more. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and held something out, a small quilt square, yellow and faded rose. This was tucked beside it. Looked like it had been stitched by hand. She took it, running her thumb along the frayed edge. "My sister made that before she died. I used to keep it with me when I was scared." Silas nodded once. It seemed like it mattered. They sat in the hush that followed, the only movement the slow rise and fall of the baby's breath and the fluttering leaves overhead. Veronica sipped the tea, bitter but warming. "I don't want to go to Helena just to be beholden," she said after a while. "My brother means well, but he's stern, always was. I think he'll see me as something to manage." Silas shifted, squinting toward the trees. "Would you rather stay out here?" She hesitated. "I don't know yet. But I don't want to be sent where I don't belong. You don't strike me as someone who lets herself be sent anywhere." She glanced at him, then back at the trees. "I used to be." He didn't respond, but the quiet stretched between them again, this time gentler. Later that afternoon, after Jameson had fed and fallen asleep again, Veronica found Silas mending fence rails near the far edge of the clearing. She watched him a moment before speaking. "Did you always live like this? Solitary, I mean." He leaned against the post, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not always. Rode with a cattle drive from Kansas when I was 19. Thought I'd end up with a ranch of my own, but things shifted." "What changed?" "Folks I counted on didn't pan out, and I learned I preferred land that didn't ask for noise." Veronica leaned on the fence post beside him. "You don't seem bitter about it." No sense being bitter over what's already passed. She studied his profile, sun-darkened skin, the quiet set of his mouth. "You're steady," she said. He met her eyes. "And you're strong." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dry grass. Neither of them moved. "I keep thinking about that moment," she said. "When I looked up and saw you there. I don't know why you stopped, but I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't." "I stopped because someone needed me," he said, voice even. "But you stayed." He nodded. "I couldn't leave." For the first time she reached for him, not a grand gesture, just her hand brushing the back of his, rough palm to rough palm. "I'm glad you didn't," she said. And he didn't pull away. By the end of the week, Veronica's steps had steadied. Her strength came back in quiet intervals, first the ability to stand without bracing herself, then to carry water from the rain barrel without needing a rest halfway. Each new task taken back was a stitch in the torn cloth of her confidence. That morning, she was gathering wild chamomile near the tree line with Jameson tucked against her in a sling made from an old flannel work shirt. The child slept easily, his breath warm through the cloth, his tiny hand curled near her ribs. The sun rode high and sharp, drawing steam from the damp earth. She heard Silas before she saw him, his boots moving slow through the brush, not trying to surprise her but not loud either. "There's a wagon headed north," he said once he reached her. "Looks to be a family, maybe headed toward Fort Benton. They were making camp a few miles out." She looked up from her crouch. "Think they'll pass this way? Could be. I mentioned there's a cabin out here. They might stop if they're low on water." She stood, brushing the soil from her palms. "Wouldn't hurt to meet someone decent." They had a little girl, maybe 5 or 6. The man seemed peaceable. She tucked a stem of chamomile behind her ear. "It's strange. I haven't spoken to another woman in nearly a month." Silas glanced at the sling but said nothing. They walked back together along the narrow deer trail. A pine cone cracked under his heel, startling a jay from the branches overhead. "I've been thinking," Veronica said, stepping around a root. "Helena's still far, and I'm not eager to be beholden to anyone when I get there." Silas looked over but waited. "I'd like to earn my way. Sewing, maybe. I was good with a needle before all this." He nodded once. "There's a widow in White Sulphur Springs. Took in mending and raised 3 boys besides. Folks still bring her work from 4 counties. It's not nothing." "I don't need much," she said. "Just a place where I can be useful." They reached the clearing. The cabin stood quiet beneath the trees, its roof patched now with bark and tar paper where Silas had worked 2 evenings ago. She saw the child's basin by the door, filled with sun-warmed water from the morning. Veronica paused before stepping onto the stoop. "You'd said you thought about a place of your own once." "I did." "You ever still think about it?" Silas leaned against the post, arms crossed over his chest. "Sometimes, but it always seems far off. Like something I'd reach for once everything else was settled first." She shifted Jameson slightly higher. "I don't think things ever settle all the way, not on their own." He met her eyes. "No, I suppose they don't." She stepped inside first, heading for the cradle they'd built together out of scrap wood and a saddle cinch. Jameson stirred but didn't wake. She bent low, easing him down. Silas came in behind her and closed the door softly. "I'm not going to Helena," she said without turning. "Not yet." He didn't answer right away. The only sound was the soft pop of the fire. "I wouldn't want you to stay just because it's easier than leaving." "I wouldn't," she said. "But I won't walk away from something that's already holding." She straightened and turned, brushing her hands together. Her gaze held his. "I know what it looks like to be left behind," she said. "I don't want to make a habit of it on either end." Silas stepped forward, the space between them closing like a gate swinging shut. "I never meant to stay this long," he said. But I haven't once wished I'd kept riding, her voice caught. I don't want to wonder every day if you'll change your mind. I already changed it, he said. The moment I saw you in the grass, for a long breath neither moved. Then she reached out, her fingers finding the edge of his shirt sleeve. I don't know what comes next, she said. I do, he answered. He brought his hand up slowly, palm warm against her jaw. She leaned into it without hesitation. Outside, the breeze stirred the pine needles. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, casting soft shadows against the walls they now shared. By the second week, the last of the snowmelt had drained from the gullies, and the trail ruts hardened beneath the sun. Veronica sat near the cabin's side wall with a length of muslin stretched over her lap, needle moving with steady rhythm. Her stitches were smaller now, more even. Jameson dozed in a cradle of willow and goose feathers, shaded by a canvas flap Silas had rigged from an old saddlebag. A woodpecker knocked somewhere high in the trees, and the scent of sun-warmed pitch hung in the breeze. Silas approached from the tree line, leading a sorrel mare with a white blaze down her nose. The horse moved slowly, favoring one leg. He'd wrapped the fetlock with linen soaked in boiled pine bark. She'll mend, he said as he tied her off near the shed. Stepped wrong in a gopher hole, but she's eating and standing strong now. Veronica set the muslin aside. She yours. Belonged to a peddler who passed through Diamond City last spring. He traded her for 2 mules and a pocket pistol. I was there to see it. She looks gentle, she is. He came to stand beside her. His hands were stained from sap, and a streak of charcoal ran across his wrist from where he'd marked the shed wall for new beams. She's yours now, he said. Veronica blinked. What for? You'll need a good horse if you're staying through winter, and I won't have you walking into town with a child strapped to your back. She looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly. You're certain about me staying? I'm certain I want you to. She didn't answer right away. The wind stirred her hair, lifting a few strands against her cheek. He brushed them back with care, his thumb grazing the curve of her temple. I don't want to be here just because it's the easier path, she said. Then don't be, he answered. Be here because you see something worth choosing. Her throat tightened. You've already given more than I had the right to ask. This land doesn't belong to me, not in deed or name, but I've built things here I care to keep. That includes you. She reached for his hand and held it, rough palm to palm, no hesitation. Then I'll stay, not because I have to, because I want to. He didn't speak, but his fingers tightened gently around hers. That night, they sat by the fire, Jameson sleeping between them in a cedar box lined with sheepskin. Silas carved a handle for a drawknife while Veronica basted a quilt top from pieced calico. Neither spoke for a long while. When she finally looked up, her voice was quiet but sure. I want to build something with you. He set the handle down. Then we will. She reached across the space between them, resting her hand against his chest. I want more than shelter. I want a life. You have it, he said. You have me. In the weeks that followed, they worked the land side by side. Veronica planted late squash and hardy greens behind the cabin, while Silas dug a trench to divert runoff from the back slope. They built a smokehouse from riverstone and split pine. When a passing tinker offered a spinning wheel in trade for dried meat and a spare rifle butt, Veronica took it gladly and set it by the window where the light lasted longest. In late September, they rode together into White Sulphur Springs with Jameson bundled between them. Veronica carried samples of her needlework, and by dusk, she'd secured mending from 2 ranch wives and a schoolteacher. Silas bought seed and a brace of chickens. A preacher offered to marry them before sundown. They didn't wait. She wore a dress hemmed that morning, and he'd shaved close for the first time in weeks. Jameson squirmed in the preacher's wife's arms while they spoke their vows beneath a cottonwood hung with early gold. On the ride home, Veronica leaned against Silas's shoulder, fingers twined with his. "You're not sorry?" she asked. He kissed her temple. "Not even a little." That winter, the snow came late and deep, but the cabin held firm and the fire never failed. Veronica taught herself to spin coarse wool, and Silas built a cradle that rocked smooth on pine runners. Jameson grew strong and quiet-eyed, his hands always reaching toward the light. They slept side by side, their bodies warm beneath layered quilts, breath soft in the hush of night. Love grew not in grand declarations, but in the way she brought him tea before sunrise, the way he drew her hand into his without needing to speak. It was in every fence post set together. Every night they took turns walking their son when he cried. By spring, the land was theirs in all the ways that mattered. No deed, no ink, but roots nonetheless, and they were no longer two people surviving, they were a family. Whole, steady, home.